Let me know. Let me
Okay,
know
so
when. Let me know
so I
when.
just want to like contextualize things for you, Kim. So we know each other through Eastern State. I'm Lauren. Everybody calls me LZ. I'm the director of education, and I work with Ryan here at Eastern State and Curry. Ryan and I worked on the Teacher Institute over the summer. Aisha was one of the teachers that participated in the Teacher Institute, and Aisha, you can introduce yourself in a couple minutes. And so we're doing teachbacks where the teachers from the Teacher Institute are going to share what they worked on with their students, share those resources so that teachers like you who weren't here for the Teacher Institute can go ahead and implement those programs in their classrooms. We took a deep dive into the history of incarceration, what's happening in prisons today. And one of the people that taught us a lot, who we brought in as a scholar, was Dr. Keith Reeves.
I'm not sure it's a lot.
Um,
You're being too generous. You guys
I
actually taught
always will be with you. So we're
you
gonna
taught
start
me.
with Keith is gonna talk to us about the school to prison pipeline. Ryan's gonna lead us in an activity that we did during the Teacher Institute and talk about how you can implement that in your classroom. And then Aisha's gonna talk about what she did with her students, her middle school students this year. So I guess Aisha, do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
I'm Aisha. I teach seventh and eighth graders humanities, which is basically our combined English and social studies course. I teach seventh and eighth graders combined in one classroom.
Mm.
And what's good about that is I get to have them for 2 years. So the same kids I have in seventh grade, as long as they're studying at the school, I have them again in eighth grade. So all of my units I kind of do in a 2-year cycle. So each kid gets every unit that I have, but it just depends on when it falls. I teach at Science Leadership Academy Middle School. And I've been teaching there for 3 years. I've also only been a teacher for 3 years, but it's been amazing. I build my own curriculum using a unit by design plan. And we're project-based learning, so we get to do a lot of fun things with our students that I'm really, really grateful for.
And could you just give Kim, and I don't know, you may know this, Kim, but a little bit about the uniqueness of Science Leadership Academy, because it was also like Constitution High that we worked with, and how it was generated, because it is a special school to be a Philadelphia school, but it is a special Philadelphia school.
So we are a part of what they call the innovative network in the school district. So it's a free school, free Philadelphia public school. However, we just kind of branched off from the high school. And again, we do that project-based learning that isn't done in every school. A lot of the things that we do, we try to have the district implemented. We kind of just get a lot of I guess I would like to say freedom to get to go and build and do different things and experiment with what learning can look like in the classroom, especially when it comes to the project-based learning and things like that. So like one of the things I was asked on my interview was like teaching in a glass room is kind of because we're always on that front line because people want to come see what we're doing. And also get a lot of, I want to say, I don't think scrutiny is the right word, but that's pretty much what it often feels like from the district as well. They're often like looking at us, seeing what we're doing, also making sure that we're still hitting all of the standards. So we challenge a lot of what the district does in that way. But we still, we do it in, I feel like, a really, really great way. Even things like we recently last year, we got the okay to start doing our report card conferences differently. So now we do report card conferences, and this may be only at the middle school, but we do our report card conferences at the interim now. So we get to sit down with families, come in, have a conference with them during the interim conference versus it being at the end of the quarter. That gives them the chance, like students a chance to see where they are, what's going on, check in with that, and give them a chance to, fix grades, look at what they're doing, look at any patterns, and see what they can do better by the end of the quarter. So we get, I guess we're privileged in that way to do a lot of different things like that and experiment with the way we want to teach in our classroom.
And Ryan and I had the honor of going to Aisha's classroom and seeing her teach, and she is amazing with her students. It's always good as museum educators to like go into schools. I always learn so much, and it's incredibly humbling. So I'm so excited to have you here, Aisha. And then Ryan, do you just want to say a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name's Ryan Serrano Hall. I'm the education coordinator here at Eastern State. Talk a lot to a lot of different kids about a lot of different issues, the historical aspect of it, and then more like contemporary issues as well. But like LZ said, we had the privilege and like opportunity to go speak at Aishah School to the kids and like really the effects that this has on all of us, not just the people that are directly affected by being in prison or like the criminal justice system. Me and LZ are hosting with the Department of Justice a reentry simulation at Springside Chestnut Hill School, right? In 2 weeks in April. So more or less, talk to a lot of different people about some pretty complex topics, and I just try to make it make sense the best I can and resonate with them the best it can, if that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah.
So Keith, do you want to introduce yourself and then you can roll
Sure.
right into
Yeah, so I'll do it briefly.
your
So I'm Keith,
talk?
yes, I'm Keith Reeves. I'm a professor of political science at Swarthmore College, and I direct the program on inequality, urban inequality and incarceration. And I started Swarthmore's NSAID program back in 2012, I guess. And this is where we take our college students into prison spaces, and they learn alongside our incarcerated students. And I've been working in the prison space probably since 2003. But most importantly, I served on Eastern State's board for 9 years, I think. Did three-year terms. I loved it. My time was up until I had to come off the board, but I'm hoping at some point the powers will prevail to invite me back.
Good, because we're hoping that
so-
too.
That's on tape. That's on
So I
tape.
learned
We've recorded it.
I learned a lot, and my work has been heavily influenced by my connections and what I've learned at Eastern State. And here's how wonderful the feedback loop is. So I had a chance to meet Aishah and Ryan in the Summer Institute last summer in August, and that was so inspiring that I actually started a new course on the school to prison pipeline, which I'm actually teaching this semester to a group of students from Bryn Mawr, Haverford, Swarthmore in the city on Wednesdays, which is why I was rushing back. And that's been extraordinary. So the feedback loop goes not simply from high school to college, but college to high school. And it's been extraordinary. And the students have been amazing. There are 18 students from all the 3 campuses. It's full to capacity, and we've been doing a deep dive into the school to prison pipeline. So part of what I'll share, I'd really rather would have a conversation, but I'll just give you the first couple of slides that give you a sense of what we've been covering, and then just open it up to questions and debate and conversation. And then I'll share with you on the last part, we were visited by 2 amazing Pulitzer Prize contention journalists today, one of whom is actually on the front page of today's New York Times. So this is a guy named Jerry Miller, who's been researching and covering civil rights cases, particularly in the South. He was the one who apparently, Jerry Miller is his name, did a deep dive into the Klan and the Klansmen who assassinated Medgar Evers, and essentially his deep dive reporting brought them to justice. And but Jerry was with us today in class, so the students had a chance to see what's happening on the adult side, but also how the juvenile, I don't call it the criminal justice system. I don't think there's justice in this. So my preferred language is criminal legal system and or juvenile legal system, but the ways in which those systems are interfacing, interacting, interlocking, and the ways in which we oftentimes don't talk about, the contribution that foster care, homelessness, mental illness, the ways in which those variables come into impact what we are calling the school to prison pipeline. So I'll share my screen just really quickly, and just to show you just real quickly, 1 or 2 can you see that?
Yes.
Let me get rid of that. And let me just, I thought I had the present, I had the, okay, let's see. See, where's the presentation? Let's see. Sorry, I've got a lot of stuff here. I thought I pulled it up.
I saw it kind of back
Yeah,
there. I think
yeah,
if you
I-
hit the PowerPoint icon at the bottom, it might come up again.
Okay,
There it
is.
is. Yeah.
Okay. I knew it was there somewhere. Um, so just giving you a sense, I don't want to kind of go through this formally, but just giving you a sense of what we've been talking through. And so we've been doing a real deep dive into these issues. And here's the graphic that we start the conversation with. And I'll share this PowerPoint with everybody as well. But we're looking at the factors from school expulsion to race to zip code to criminal legal tools, and really trying to figure out some of the historical underpinnings of why the school to prison pipeline exists the way it does. This is one of the graphics that is most arresting, no pun intended, that most people are familiar with, and that is the amounts of money that we're spending on the criminal legal side versus what we are spending in higher ed. And most importantly, this is the real graphic piece I want to point out. We've been doing a deep dive into these issues, and that is going to the origins of where the school to prison pipeline comes from. So a lot of the literature, not surprisingly, is focusing on school expulsions and the contribution of foster care, homelessness, all kinds of issues related to poverty. I take the students back to some of the historical origins, and that is to the very nature of race itself in this country, structure. So we spend a lot of time looking at the redlining of Black neighborhoods, particularly Philadelphia, and the role of racial residential segregation. Then we do a deep dive into the underdevelopment, but also the disinvestment of communities. And then we do a lot of conversation around spatial policies and forced displacement. So the fact that if you're familiar with Chester, for example, where I do most of my work in Philadelphia as well, but Chester is home to PPL, the soccer league and the soccer park, but also to Harrods Philadelphia casino.
Yep.
But the government took by eminent domain enormous amount of people's homes in order to widen 291 so that traffic could flow off of the Commodore Barry Bridge into the soccer stadium area, up to the casino, up to the airport, and the disinvestment in communities are also creating and or exacerbating the poverty that's there. And remember, these schools are sitting in communities of neighborhoods that are also heavily impoverished. And so we grapple with some of that. And then the important piece, which the students don't oftentimes get, and that is the notion of social isolation and idleness. My grandmother would always say that idleness is the devil's plaything. And so the worst thing we can do, and we oftentimes do, unfortunately, as educators, is we suspend a student and we suspend him or her or they out of school. That's the worst thing you can do, because now they are sitting in the community space idle, and sometimes they will find themselves in the wrong place, the wrong time, with the wrong crowd, and then find themselves in situations that become really difficult to get out of. And for most of the students I work with at the young person level, but also into adulthood, they don't have the scaffolding that lots of more well-off communities have. And so we spend a lot of time working on those issues, and then the lack of contextual mobility for families. And then very importantly, we read my colleagues and friends work Eli Anderson, Code of the Street. And one of the things we have to grapple with in lots of community spaces is the nature of interpersonal violence and the distrust of the police and how our communities come to look the way they do. All of this pours into the schools. So in the 1990s, late 80s, 1990s, we saw lots of schools adopting this sort of get tough, zero tolerance policies, also spurred by the Clinton 1994 crime bill, and the ways in which we are outsourcing discipline to SROs, which I would argue are really school resource officers who really are police officers inside our schools. And so we've been grappling with all of those issues. And as you can imagine, enormously contentious. I say to all the students, I will never tell them what to think. My job is to just put lots of things in front of them, give them lots of things to think about. And, as John Lewis says, cause a little bit of good trouble by getting them into all kinds of fascinating, wonderful arguments. And it's been an extraordinary opportunity for me to bring a little bit of what I know in the adult side, but also what I've learned, helped along by Aishah and Ryan, is there's a lot of stuff I don't know. And so I'm really overwhelmed in a good way of how much there is to learn about the juvenile side and the ways in which so many of the men that I work with are grappling with trauma and mental illness and or notions of interpersonal violence and how that pours into a situation or sometimes situations that gets them into legal trouble that with the right resources intervention, they might be steered differently on a diversion course so that they don't end up into what's called the school to prison pipeline. So that's what we've been up to, but the course is brand new. I do a check-in with all the students every week to say, okay, so how is this working? Am I giving you too much? And I've been really kind of positively, wonderfully overwhelmed that the students are saying this is the best class they've taken. And that really has been heavily influenced by spending time with Ryan, Aisha, and Lauren inviting me to come into the space. So, but I'm really, really floored every week of what I thought I knew and what I had to go back and learn. But it will take me a while to kind of master this space. But and wonderfully, I've started working with the women last year. So I now teach the women who are at the Philadelphia Industrial Correction Center on State Road. And most of them, about 87% of them, are custodial parents. So I'm getting a chance, aside from research, but getting a chance to see the practical impact of women who are finding themselves in a criminal legal situation, and we are building a legal clinic around them to help with all kinds of issues that they may be struggling with and so on. So, but all of that, again, heavily influenced by my time with Lauren and Aisha and Ryan. And so I tell everybody that if you disagree with anything I say, you have that group to blame, and here's where all their contact information is, and here's how you can find them. But I've been really, really thrilled with what I've been learning and the impact on students, many of whom are going to be teachers themselves. They will go into PhD programs. Some of them will go into law enforcement, but on the prosecution and or judge side. And with all the things that we're putting in front of them, if they can use this information and just be a little bit more tempered in their judgment, in their decision making, and their empathy, and their willingness to give grace to students, to parents, to families, then we will see these ripple effects ultimately culminate where we're not looking simply for reform at the state legislature side, but we're getting real reform and genuine families, communities, human beings, where from my perspective, it matters most. Yeah, so that's what I've been up to. And as John Lewis says, causing good trouble.
Dr. Reeves, I'll share
Please
with
call me Keith. Please call me Keith.
Hi, Keith. I'll share the resources with, I just did an activity with my AP students for Unit 3 on civil liberties and civil rights. And it was a collection of current events that document to show how Philadelphia school districts in the area, we are still some of the most segregated in the nation.
Yep.
And there's an interactive map that I had them go to look to see how the segregation, how it's affected by
I know exactly what you're talking about. I have it right here. Yep. I have it right there.
And about how the Civil Rights Act, we really still haven't seen the issues. There's an article just came out in March about this, and it was pretty powerful for my kids because we're an affluent suburban district.
Right. Sure.
To look and to see, okay, we just learned about Brown, we just learned about the Civil Rights Act, but look at where we are still today in 2024 in your state where you live in your area. And it was really powerful because then also goes to show how they already have so much advantages over everything else because they have a better education than they do.
Yeah, Kim, I think that's so awesome. And thank you for sharing that and keep doing that. Our students, as wonderful and as talented, as bright as they are, they think that the civil rights gains that we're only about a generation and a few years, that this is ancient history, but being able to say that most of our parents, our grandparents lived under this, and to have 200 plus years of racial subjugation that was codified by law, and as we've been changing and trying to put in place a much more egalitarian society, but we have to keep pressing and fighting, and it's also their responsibility to take on this democratic project to make sure we fight for all of our rights, right? And that we can try to get equality in processes, but also equality toward equality of outcomes. So I love the work you're doing. And Aisha said something that is really quite powerful that I want to foreground and lift up, and that is the notion of doing project-based work. That ends up being enormously powerful. So we do it on the we call it an experiential education at the college level, but it's the same mode and process where we're exposing our students to the topic and we do a deep dive. And then I happen to have the privilege of taking them into the jail or prison space to learn alongside our classmates who are subjected to the criminal legal penalties that we're studying. There's nothing more powerful than that experiential piece and being able to then go back and say, well, you read something that Reeves wrote, or you read something that LZ wrote or Ryan wrote, and does that square with what you've learned from your classmate who's sitting to the left and the right of you, or does that square with what you just saw in terms of how you saw a correction officer kind of treat one of your classmates less than human, right? And let's talk about that. And let's now figure out how we can begin to change literature, concepts, narratives, language, policies, practices, because eventually 95%, and everybody knows this, but 95% of everybody who is in prison, eventually they will end up going home. And they are our families, they're our neighbors. So I'm really very much a champion of project-based learning, experiential education. And Ryan mentioned the reentry simulations, which are equally powerful. I've done 3 of them so far as a participant. I was on a panel with the one that colleagues of ours did in Delaware County a few weeks ago. And that was extraordinary. I learned, even though I've been in the space now for 20 years, I learned something new every time I take myself through one of those simulations. And we did a fabulous one at Eastern State. That was fabulous. So if you guys as school teachers get a chance to do the reentry simulation and bring that into your classrooms, I would be honored and thrilled on the other side of it to help you walk through and to have a conversation with your students and your colleagues about, so what does this mean? And what do we do? And there's also, this was the joy of being at the first one at the National Constitution Center and then the second one at Eastern State, is seeing grown men and adults and women and law enforcement and judges and prosecutors get totally stumped and get frustrated and start cursing and start having fits that and this is just a little bit of the life of. And again, if it helps them temper their decision making, be a little bit more empathetic, maybe think about sending Reeves on a diversion path, because there's something in my history that says jail or prison is really not where I should be. That will begin to change the systems that are interlocking, that is keeping so many of our young people in particular in spaces where they really should not be. So thanks for that work. Mhm.
Keith, do you think Governor Shapiro's plan, since the state Supreme Court ruled that the way we fund our schools is unconstitutional? I think that was like last year, and that Shapiro's new education plan, kind of to redistribute the wealth, give more wealth to those schools where they're that are underfunded, where predominantly are minorities. Do you think that is like going to be a good start in trying to level the playing field, or do you think it's not going to be enough because of how far behind everything is?
It's a great question. I'm still thinking it through. Part of me is I think it's a great idea. I'm already, because I do a lot of politics and I'm always thinking of where the opposition is coming from. It would not surprise me if you see lots of wealthier school districts, including Swarthmore, unfortunately, who fight that. Because so much of school funding, of course, we know, comes from real estate school taxes, right? But I would argue we have to go farther than that, and that is these inequalities of funding and resources and opportunities go generations back. That's why we start with the Constitution itself, right? The Eighth Amendment, which is clear, you should not put in place excessive cash bail, because that's essentially cruel and unusual punishment, right? Or the 13th Amendment, right? The abolishment of slavery, except for the criminal code clause. the right to a speedy trial, right? All of those things end up being really quite important. But the structure of the way in which this American experiment has been put in place already leaves us out, and African Americans, right? We didn't get the right to vote really until the 1960s. Women didn't get the right to vote till the 1920s, 1920. So structurally, you have to go back in and say, how do we go and deal with the structure that is producing these inequalities and interlocking them generation over generation over generation? So I would argue, because these schools sit in neighborhoods and these neighborhoods sit in rural communities, there has to be some really enormous investment in communities and in neighborhoods, and moving people on a trajectory to upward mobility. And that's a far longer, larger, more expensive project, but ultimately it's for all of our benefit if we are educating all of our kids and giving them an opportunity to be the best that they can be in whatever chosen profession they decide to be. So I think Governor Shapiro's plan is a start. I would want him to go much farther. Last I checked, pardon my voice, last I checked, Pennsylvania, the second largest item on the state budget is the monies that we put toward incarceration court costs under the guise of public safety and law enforcement. We are literally doing ourselves as a country a disservice by not investing in our neighborhoods and then investing in our schools. And the other powerful piece, which all of you have, is there's research that indicates that for kids who we work with in these poor urban and rural communities, if they don't have an adult, just one adult, who is in some other educational social class, that ends up being an enormously powerful predictor of also how well they're going to do. So the powerful part of our example of just being engaged and being present and showing kids that we care about them and that we invest in them. And yes, this is hard work, but we can work with you. You're going to get there. There's power in the tongue, but also there's power in presence and power in engagement. And you guys, if you all know, you have far more influence and far more power over the lives and trajectory of our students than you ever can imagine. Because when I see them on the adult side, unfortunately in jail, prison spaces, not that it's too late, but oftentimes I'll ask them, how did you get here? Like, you're smarter than I am. Like, how did you get here? And oftentimes I take them through, I think Ryan knows this, I take them through what's called a lifeline exercise. So it's a blank piece of paper, a black line across, 4 markers. The first mark is your birth date. The last mark is today's date. So if we were doing it, we fill out our birth date. The last mark would be March 20th, 2024. And then the 2 other markers in between. One of them I asked, give me the date and a few words about the most positive thing that ever happened to you. And then the other marker, give me the date and a few words of the most negative, impactful thing that happened to you. And this is all anecdotal, and I've been doing this now since 2012. Somewhere between the age of 5 and 12, or the age of 5 and 14, something traumatic has happened to that young man, that woman who's in my prison class. And it's oftentimes something of trauma. They lost a grandmother, or an older brother introduced my guy to drugs, or there was some physical, mental abuse in the household, or the family was evicted and now they were homeless. But that traumatic experience ended up putting them in a place where the gravitational pull of the streets was such that they're like, well, why should I go to school? Right? This is the point of the wire, which is so really kind of interesting. And part of what we have to do as teachers, as educators, as policymakers is when that stuff happens, when trauma in life happens, middle class, wealthier neighborhoods, they have that scaffolding, right? Judge Mathis says that when white kids get into trouble, they've got counseling. When poor and black and brown and poor white kids get into trouble, they go to jail, right? And we have to do something about that. We're in a position to do something about that. And that means that each one of you, Kim, you have a piece, Aishah has a piece, Ryan has a piece, Lauren has a piece, I have a piece, and really having conversations and being in partnership with each other to say at the end of the day, it's within our capacity to turn this around. Because here's the thing, right? They're using our tax dollars and um, filing suit against me in the people's name. So when the Commonwealth comes after me for some criminal conviction, it's the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Keith Reeves. And they don't even say Dr. Keith Reeves. It's Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Keith Reeves. So all of this stuff is being done, has been built in our name. We have the power to slowly dismantle it. And the problem and the challenge for all of us is that this is going to be a county by county, state by state project, right? Pennsylvania is an enormously large state, 67 counties. And that means every county has its own jail. And that doesn't include the Philadelphia prison system, which is its own entity, its own juggernaut. And that doesn't include the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, which is its own juggernaut. It doesn't include ICE. It doesn't include the halfway houses. It doesn't include the boot camps. It doesn't include the juvenile facilities. And we have built this. This has been built in our name under the guise of public safety. And yet the research is real clear. We're not safer as a society, as a country, for all of the public investments we've made in jails and prisons and correctional facilities. And then the last point, to put an exclamation point on it, I was in Center City. I teach in the Tri-College program on Wednesdays, the School to Prison Pipeline course. And I remind the students, when we come into Center City, get off at Suburban Station, we walk a block and a half up to Cherry Street. If you're in Center City at the clothespin, 1 out of 5 Philadelphians around you is walking around with a criminal conviction.
Yep.
1 out of 5. And they are stunned. These are neighbors, friends, family members, citizens, and we have a responsibility to all of us, not just the more privileged and the well-off among us.
It's interesting. This is going back and I'm dating myself, but when I was an undergraduate at Millersville University, I worked with the Lancaster Partnership Program, and we worked with mentoring minority students from middle school through high school. So from Han Middle School and McCaskey High School. And we mentored them. And if they graduated, they were guaranteed to go to Millersville free. And there was a tutoring program that I helped and with coordinate, and we mentored students. And the whole idea, but it was interesting because I student taught at McCaskey High School, and you know, I was the minority, but then also these were kids that had drive-by shootings, that someone was injured. We had a daycare for their kids because so many of them had children. And it was just, you know, that was something that, and then I worked with the Upward Bound program, mentoring.
I'm an Upward Bound student, yes.
Okay. So
It's
I'm
Swarthmore,
dating myself, but you know, it's just, that's going back almost like 35 years ago.
Right.
You know, and I don't even know if those programs are still going with Millersville and Lancaster or not, but.
Right. No, but Kim, you point out so rightly, those were investments that we as a society decided to make. And I can tell you they made all the difference. I'm a product of the Swarthmore Bound program. They caught me in my late twin as first year freshman and stayed with us, gave us all kinds of summer enrichment. Because the Chester Public Schools were okay, but they were not challenging us. And but had it not been for that program, I'm confident there's no way I could have ever had the kind of professional life trajectory that I turned out. One of my mentors, who's deceased now, Jewish mentor of mine, reminded me all the time that when immigrants came to this country, they could normally it would take them 4 to 5 generations before they got into the middle class. So we think about the Kennedys, right? Or you think about the families whose origin started as an immigrant story, but now they are enormously successful. The Kennedys come to mind. And those programs like Upward Bound and other mentoring programs allow individuals, poor, white, Black, Latino, to move from communities in which they are either working poor. It allows them to move in the middle class, not in 4 or 5 generations, but in 2. And that's the power of those investments, right? And the challenge is, how do we as citizens make the commitment with our votes and with our voice and with our wallets and our pocketbooks that these are investments that we have to continue to make for all of us, ourselves, and for the larger society. And my fear is that we're in a volatile political context where it's just exhausting. You turn on the news and you're like, oh my God, I'd rather have a bourbon. And then, but that's the piece that's problematic, because if we disengage and tune out, then you leave the more vocal, intense minority to then have a say of what should happen, right? So this is where we get book bans, and this is where we get policies against transgender students, and this is where we get the bullying, and all of that. We have to stand up and say, this is exhausting. Let's take a breather, take our breath, do whatever we need to do to regroup, but we have to keep pushing and fighting and give our students the tools to be able to call it out and say, this is not really democratic, all right? And why are we denying my fellow classmates the ability to connect? This generation, I can tell you from being with college students all the time, this generation is really, really pissed at us. Really pissed.
Yeah.
Because
Yep.
from their perspective, pardon my language, everything is effed up, right? Our educational system, they got student loans. They are having to come back and live with their parents. They are working on and concerned about issues of equality and climate change and the income wage inequality gap. And they don't see us as adults, politicians, doing anything about it, right? There isn't one moral, spiritual, political leader whom they can go to, right? And who they look with revere. So they're looking at Kim Kardashian West and all the other pop cultural figures, and they are saying to us, and I'll be 58 next month, but they're saying, Reeves, we love you, you're a great prof, but at some point you need to get out the way, because either this changes, or we are going to self-destruct and burn this down. And I'm like, okay, if you do that, what are you going to build it? What are you going to rebuild it? They don't have a plan. They're not even concerned about that yet. And so we have a real task in front of us of regaining this generation's trust, but also helping them to rebuild our institutions. And that's a much larger project. So what Governor Shapiro is up to is going to be helpful, certainly necessary. But in my view, it's not really as sufficient. We need some other pieces that will get at the structural piece that will help turn this around. But this will take a generation. This is one of those kinds. Imagine what actually we need is a domestic Peace Corps, and just say we're going to commit to a generation. A lot of the guys I work with in the jail and prison space will say, so Doc, so we figured out how to put a man on the moon, and we can't figure out how to dismantle the criminal legal system in this country. We can't figure out how to solve rural and urban poverty. We can't figure out how to better educate our students and our kids. And we are sending all kinds of major technological advances. And my answer is, it's not simply we don't have the money, the investments, it's the political will to fight for the things that matter to us. And that's a much more intense, larger project, but we have to be geared up to take that on.
So you teed us up amazingly with that conversation, because Ryan's going to take us through an exercise that we did during the Teacher Institute that's about reimagining things. And we learned this activity through our connections with the Inside Out program from a group of currently incarcerated men that run a restorative justice group called Let's Circle Up that happens at State Correctional Institution at Phoenix. And it's really powerful. And so we included it in the Institute, and we also sometimes do it with students. And so Ryan's going to take us through that briefly.
Yeah, and I just want to say, so pretty much when Reeves was talking at the Institute over the summer, I didn't know people already knew or were so aware of all these issues that were going on, especially with the exercise as far as like from 5 to 14, when you have a traumatic experience, the outcome 9 times out of 10 is somebody's going to prison. That really motivates me and gives me fuel, because I thought he was talking, I don't know what I thought when he was talking about that in that institute. He gave me chills because I thought he was talking to me about everything. And I was just like, oh, there's something way bigger at work here than like this. I'm over here blaming myself for years upon years for my mistakes, and it's like, no, this was set up and it's structured like this. So the work we do with kids, and to touch on what you said about Shapiro with the funding, as far as there needs to be more money sent to Philadelphia schools for the disparities of everything. Just to point out, last year there was 155 kids shot either going to or leaving Philadelphia public schools. And I believe 3 months ago, rough or timeline wise, I'm not too sure. I know over the summer, there's 21 schools through Philadelphia shut down from heat. There was not proper air conditioning or ventilations, in addition to asbestos. So it's like, these kids have a future. These kids are our future. And if we don't have basic grounds for them to learn and to really adapt upon and to succeed in, how can they even have hope for the future? And Reeves is over here saying how they want to burn it all down, but then what's next? So I just try to do my best to show them a different way, and not be angry at the world like I was from everything I had to experience. So that's my spiel. That's why I do what I do. I don't, when you ask like, what do I do here at Eastern State? I do a lot, but it's more so just trying to help who I can help in the ways I can and make it make sense. So hopefully you're seeing on the screen right now an image of Lady Justice. What we do here, and this is going to be condensed, just out of respect for time, and I want to give Aishah time to really go into what she did with her students and the talkback and whatnot. Here at Eastern State, we have a tour called Defining Justice. It's a 90-minute tour. We start off with this image, and we really allow people to come in and take this all in. What is justice? What is defining justice? What does it mean in today's society? What does it mean to somebody personally? So starting off, I want to see if people are familiar with this image and what really resonates with them. I remember when we were doing it in the Institute with Aishah and the other teachers that were involved in it, we didn't do it traditionally how it would be presented, how I'm going to ask right now. So obviously everybody's seen this before. Everybody's been involved in sort of like this project before. In one aspect, it would say, what are the healthy pinpoints or variables that you see when looking at an image like this? You could say the stature of this statue, it's very strong, it's uplifting, it's looking pretty resilient. You have a sword that's going to resonate maybe justice or liberty. A scale as far as like balancing what's good and what's bad. And let me say this on a side note, from this day forward, I'm probably referring to the justice system as the criminal legal system from now on, because I don't know.
We got that on tape too.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and that makes it make sense. How do you have a second chance if you don't have a first chance going forward? So it's like, what do we do from that, right? So in one aspect, you present this to the class, or you would present it to the groups as saying, what would be the healthy variables that you take away from this, the positives, and what does that really look like, right? And then to add on to that, what is the negative aspects? So you could say, in my personal opinion, I don't know why they have a crown. And I don't know why they're blindfolded. I know we're led to believe that justice is not supposed to be biased and it's supposed to be blind to anything. But if you can't see where a child's coming from or what led them there, you're judging them off of the current mistakes and what's in front of you that day. So it's like, if you can't see their past, how are you going to judge them off the current presence? That's just my personal opinion. Anybody have a personal opinion with this or observation? They might want to add to this.
I think it reminds me of the debates that the Supreme Court justices have had over the 14th Amendment and about whether the Constitution is colorblind or not. And last year, how Justice Jackson was schooling them that the whole 14th Amendment was based upon race and about seeing color, and schooling them on John Bingham, and basically was trying to tell them that no, the Constitution isn't colorblind. There are specific things that were designed to consider race, to consider these other factors, like the 14th Amendment and the Reconstruction Amendments were to consider the legacy of slavery and to start being a basis for equality. And so, yeah, so when I look at that, that's what it reminds me of, those recent ongoing debates that went on last year's term and this year's term between the Supreme Court justice and the reversal of affirmative action. And
yeah, and I just want to underscore what Kim just said, Ryan. Thank you for the introduction Everything you said was spot on. I actually wrote a few things down I'm going to steal from you. But when I saw this and tie into what Kim was saying, I was struck by something that former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney said from Georgia, and that is, if race, to Kim's point, if race was used to exclude, how and why is it now unconstitutional to use race or think about race to now include, right? And so I think about that every time I see Lady Justice. And I tried my best to hold my temper because there's nothing about the Supreme Court, I would argue, that is democratic, right? Last time I checked, there are 9 people unelected who I never voted for. I mean, I voted for a president who, of course, appoints justices and all, but you have 9 unelected people who are not taking into account where the majority of the country is on a wide range of issues, certainly
Yeah.
from justice issues, race, reproductive rights, and so on. And what's problematic is that their decisions will hold sway over much of the country for a generation or so or more, even after the justices themselves die or retire, and certainly after the president who appointed him or her is no longer in office and has died and retired, right? How can that be? And yet we say we are a democratic small d republic. So I think about those contradictions when I see Lady Justice, and it enrages me. It absolutely does.
Yeah, you're not alone.
It's so
There's a-
funny that, wait, I'm sorry. It's so
No,
funny
go ahead.
that you mentioned about the Supreme Court justices, because the way our school, like the way the year unfolds right now, we get to the point where we begin looking into utopian, dystopian societies, but really at the point of letting the students begin to think about, well, what would a society look like? Knowing what we know now about our history and about our society, let's try to create our own societies. So in that, that's where we go and study the government. We touch on the government a little bit. We don't like to spend too much time on it because we know they're gonna get they're gonna get a bunch of it in high school. But we go into that, and when we were looking at the Supreme Court justices specifically, a lot of the students were like, I'm like, what do you notice about this picture? They're like, they're all old, and they're like, this is who gets to like make some decisions and have that final say on a lot of things. And they were just like, they were able to put those things out on their own. They made me so proud. They were like, well, if the president puts them in, that president's ideals are going to be living through them even after they aren't president and things like that. So like it really made my students start to wonder and question the justice system, as we call it, as well. So it's really, really definitely a lot of those contradictions in there. Even when we go through the Bill of Rights and things like that, we found, they were able to pull out a lot of things. They were like, well, this is actually a little crazy. Like this doesn't
Right, right,
make a lot
right.
of sense. So it was really, really interesting. And then we came to the point where it was like, well, if we're thinking about like the structure of our society, while we wanted to grow and change, also America wanted to make sure that they stay America and their ideals in a certain way. So of course there has to be some things ingrained in there that are going to make sure that it's still, certain ideals are held throughout certain generations, right? Because of course, like, and they made a good point. I was like, of course we wouldn't want a constitution or laws that are changing every day, right? We wouldn't want like a new president every single day, things like that. So there are certain things in place that keep it where it's like, okay, let's lock in a certain set of ideals through these generations, and when it's time to change, they'll be changed again. So, and I think we were able to point out the fact that I think we're reaching a point now where a big change is supposed to be, like, we're at a point where now there's new generations and there's new adults and there's new young adults and things like that. So there's that's why things often feel so rigid right now with us in our government.
Right. No, I appreciate that so much, Aisha. I would just add, I think when you were talking, one of the things that immediately came to mind is my fear. My fear is the ways in which the young people and folks who are our age cohort as well see the criminal legal system play out. My fear is that when we are called for jury duty, we're going to say no or find a way, an excuse. And of course, having the perspectives that we have to be in a jury pool, right? In which we can say, well, no, I grew up this way, and it's not quite what you think it is, or is this much more complicated than that? And then my second fear is that folks are going to say, I'll serve on a jury, but I'm going to entirely really do and engage in jury nullification, and that is ignore the evidence because of the structural pieces that we know that folks are aligned against this particular zip code, this particular individual, because of his or her, their race, their income, their status. And if we head down that slippery slope, we're in real trouble as a country. And I worry about that. And you guys are on the front line because you're connecting with young people and their minds are open and you are sparking their intellectual curiosity. And you're doing amazing experiential group project-based work. And you have to stay with it. You have to stay with it and stay encouraged.
So I'm gonna say two things real fast. That's like before I go off on a tangent, and then we'll wrap back up with this, so we can get Aisha time for to show us what her and the class has created. One, I always hear people talk about jury duty and like the despise they have for it. It's something I'll never experience. I wish I could serve on a jury just because something somebody said earlier was when we talk about slavery or the breakdown of amendments, change in time, or voting rights. I had no idea it was as recent as it was. We took a trip down to the Legacy Museum with the Brian Stevenson created in Alabama, EGI Institute. When I tell you it almost broke my mind, I could not believe that this system has been in place for as long as it has and continued to run. And I think to touch on everybody's points, I think we are in a pivotal point and a changing point of where the younger generations are mad. We are now aware as far as our generations, or if not older and a little bit younger, something has to change. We hear the politicians say it all the time, and I didn't know mandatory minimums were as recent as they were when it comes to 1994. I just thought they were around forever. So me having to be punished through a mandatory minimum in the federal system, when you come back to the idea of justice, what justice is this serving if you're judging me off of a law that was passed that by the Supreme Court standards or by the student standards in Aisha's class, this, look how old these people are, look at how out of touch they are, and this is somebody else's ideas living through them. So is this really serving our communities or not, right? So to wrap this up, when we talk about Lady Justice, the point of this exercise or the point of this activity, at the end, we give time to the students or the participants to say, well, then what would your idea of justice look like? Let's reimagine what Lady Justice is. Because to Keith's point, he despises this image. I'm not really too fond of this image. I don't really think this displays what justice should be, quote unquote, right? I haven't been able to come up with an image other than really just a giant peace sign, right? Just if we are always fighting or there's always judgment being cast at, you know, you point the finger, there's three pointing back at you, right? So it's like always, what are we really casting judgment on? And then who has that upper decision? Me, I have nothing else better than a peace sign, but that's really up into the interpretation of the participants or the students. And running an activity like this can be very easily implemented in any setting. We're doing it through a Zoom call right now. I'm not going to ask to do that activity with y'all just because out of respect for time and whatnot. But it's something to think about going forward. Something it can be utilized at the opening of a class or a lecture just to kind of break the ice without doing an icebreaker. Or you could really create a whole day around it. But I'm gonna pass this off to Aisha. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Let me not forget to do that. This way. Who mentioned the website? I think you did, Kim, where they did an interactive website about the laws and the cases of the Supreme Court cases, right?
Yeah, my AP kids will do, they'll select one of the cases that was argued before the Supreme Court, and they research it and all of the precedents and everything that was argued. And they create an interactive website where it links all the research and like podcasts and videos and the oral arguments before the Supreme Court. And then using all of that, make what their decision they would make if they were on the Supreme Court. And they actually write as if they're a justice and they write their opinion. And they have to cite all of the precedent and the things from there. And then I have the kids then the last like 2 weeks of school, they go to visit all of the digital projects and and then they do respond to them in the discussion board and then posting questions and thoughts. And then after they visit all of them, then I break them in to class, and we basically hold constitutional conversations on the cases. And sometimes, like last year, some of the cases when we were doing that, then the Supreme Court released their decision, like the one about California's law about humane treatment for pigs, for the pork. And the kids were so
Oh, yeah.
shocked because they were like, that's not the way the Commerce Clause has been interpreted. And what implications is that going to have with federalism? And they were, so it's a really great way for them to apply all that we've learned all year to a current context, and then also then have them responding to what the current Supreme Court justices are doing. And then I had kids, when their decisions were released on their cases, and it happened after school ended, I was getting emails from them in the summer. Can you believe they ruled this way?
Yeah,
Right.
we were able to teach our independent programs at a crime symposium, a criminal justice, well, I guess you could say criminal legal justice symposium, I don't know what you would call it, where the students that were participating in Aisha's class was coming to us next, and that's all they were talking about, was this website that they were presenting on and the topics they were presenting on. So I'll leave it up to Aisha to explain what that really looks like, or what that may facilitate into in a classroom setting. But both of your ideas are super good, super great.
Thanks.
Hold on.
You're just still on mute, Aisha.
Oh.
This is really
You got
cool
it.
though,
Yeah, I was
that
like,
you're
what is
like
happening?
I was
embedded. I
trying to
love that.
see, I'm
This
like,
is so
can
fancy.
I'm like, can I make it full screen and still do it?
Yeah.
So is it really behind me?
Yeah,
I've never done
it's
this
good. No, yeah, it looks great.
It offered it as an option, so I was like, let's go with it. But can you
Yup.
guys still see everything on there, or?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks
Okay.
It looks
amazing.
great. It looks
All
really
right.
great.
I haven't done Zoom in a long time, so I was just clicking stuff. All right. So my goal with this was thinking about how to talk about mass incarceration in the middle school classroom. I already approached all of my lessons with the idea of, like, I'm really big on pushing against feeling like, maybe not talking about it because they're too young and things like that, or feeling like they won't, be able to do certain things because they're too young and things like that. But I did want to present this in a way where people can feel like, in a middle school classroom, it is possible to have these discussions around this type of social issue. So the main points I'm going to go over like the unit plans, like my plan for it, the standards I use, the project, look at some student work, and then of course some time for questions. So first, we start each unit by design off thinking about our essential questions. What are the essential questions we want our students thinking about while we're doing this? What do we want to take from this? So we start that by inquiry, right? So question one was, what is mass incarceration? How is it able to exist in America? So that's like the main thing. First, we got to look at, what is it? How is it able to exist in America? How does this happen? Right. And then the second question was, how are laws created and how do they affect people long term? I really, really wanted this to also be a way for my students to realize that, like, these laws that have been put into place, like we were talking about a really long time ago, like in our Constitution, when we talk about 13th in that clause, a really, really long time ago, how do they then begin to affect people long term? Because if we start back there and then we see how that has spiraled into mass incarceration, I wanted that to be a really, really important thing that I wanted my kids to be able to, like, leave knowing that, like, when these laws are being put into place and we vote on these laws, or we vote for the people making these laws, they're going to affect people in the long run, right? Question number 3 was, what does resistance look like when it comes to mass incarceration? So more recently, when I do dive into the social topics, I always want them to feel like little activists. Like, I want that activism piece to be in there as well, so that they know, like, okay, we're thinking about these crazy things going on, but they're changeable. We can put up a fight against them. And what would that look like specifically when it comes to mass incarceration? So my plan, we did a 4 to 5 week unit plan. So the unit was about 4 or 5 weeks long. We studied 13th and the prison system. So we watched 13th, the documentary, and we looked at, like, again, we did like a timeline of prison activity, things like that. Just looking at what's going on in the prison system. Like, what is the prison system? What happens? Like, what's the process of someone even getting into the prison system and studying all of those things? Then the students in the end, they created a website campaign to basically educate people about mass incarceration, show the data, and then also create a call to action to try to get people to support fighting back against mass incarceration. So some things we did to dig into mass incarceration. First, we watched 13th, and I broke it down. I think we watched 20 minutes of it per class. Again, I teach middle school, so it's important for me I can't overwhelm them with one thing. We can't sit and just watch one thing the whole class. They'll lose. They won't remember it, all of it the next day. And we also had a note catcher to fill in as we watch. I'm not a big fan of busy work. So when I give things like this to my students, I let them know, I'm not giving you this because I need you to be busy. I'm giving you this because I need you to remember the things that we're watching. So I speak to them in those kind of terms, in that language, and I'm transparent with them about everything I do, so that they can know that I'm being honest, and that they respect me a lot for that. So I give them a note catcher sheet. I'm like, listen, this isn't busy work. I want you to do this because I need you to be mindful and take notes while we watch this, because this is basically the context we're using for our project, right? This is usually our units are accompanied by a book. We use a documentary. This is the first time we did this. So I'm like, listen, we got to be serious. We're watching this, but this is serious. We got to take our notes.
Can I say something real fast, Aisha?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right? When we were invited to class, when we were waiting to go break out into the classrooms to give our presentations to the kids, I remember you rewinding it and being like, "Did y'all catch this? Y'all rewind this." You went back and kids are like, "Oh, all right, go back into it." And then afterwards we talked about it, and it was like, because they get caught up in side conversations, and you give them too much of time, they start going off. But when they rewind it, they're like, "Oh, okay, I got it. I understand." So I'm
And
just picking you
also-
up. It was great.
And also that comes from me knowing my kids too. I know if they peep something and it's crazy, and I know it's crazy, and I know how they would think it's crazy, they'll usually be like, they'll have a reaction. And I didn't get that. So I said, hold on. I said, they didn't catch it. They didn't catch it. Let me rewind it for them. They could catch this thing. And then when they caught it that time, they were like, oh my gosh, right? So definitely being mindful of that when you introduce anything. You know what kind of reactions your kids should be given. So you try to make sure that they're getting that. And then again, my heart is in teaching literature and English. So that's just the English teacher in me. I'm like, wait, did y'all catch that? I make everything so dramatic. So that's just my classroom. They already know. But while we were watching 13th, the other thing we had to really do is develop the content knowledge. Because as for me, going to the Teacher Institute, I learned a lot about mass incarceration myself. So I'm like, if I'm just now learning these things, I know 9 times out of 10, my students haven't been exposed to this knowledge, and I need to develop the content or the background knowledge for this. So we did a timeline of prison lesson where I went through what happens for someone to go to prison? What is that like? So first the cop picks them up. It was a whole lesson that went through, okay, then they get, arraignment, and then there's bail set, and then they have to wait, and then there's a court date, and then you might go to trial, or it could go this way. So we went through that whole process so they can familiarize themselves with it. And already in that process, they started seeing some flaws in that system. And then we went through think about, well, how are laws made, right? So we went through everything, and we studied systems a lot in my class, just looking at how everything works as a system. So looking at how laws were made was just another example of that for them to see, these are how these laws have been put into place. We looked at mandatory sentencing. We looked at California's 3 strikes rules and things like that, just so they can look at how these laws came into play and how they're affecting people. And then we went and looked at some real life stories of things like exoneration by looking at the Square One project and things like that. So we while studying the content, it's also very important. I feel like me personally, with my students, I noticed that they latch onto things when they're able to have a real life connection to it. They need to be able to see, okay, this is happening to real people and how it's happening, and be able to actually see it, and read it for themselves. And then we went and we looked at, because I wanted to create a website campaign, it was also important for me. I was like, they need to see that this work is also already being done so that they can see how it's being done and then try to model that, because they are middle schoolers. And while I want them to come up with something new, I also want them to look and see what's already being done so that they can use that, as inspiration. So we looked at organizations already doing work around mass incarceration, and I showed examples of organizations like the Innocence Project and more. And then using Eastern State team as a resource, where I had them come in and talk to them about everything they knew, just pouring the things into them that they had already poured into me about mass incarceration as well. Just so that, again, they can have that to pinpoint as an example and be like, okay, so this place is doing this and they do these things. How can I look at this and, make it relevant to the things that I want to implement maybe? And just, I know, as teachers, it's important to think about standards, right? Because especially with my project-based learning, that's one of the main things. In order for project-based learning to be done successfully in the state of, at least to my knowledge, in the state of Pennsylvania, you need to align everything you're doing still with standards. So some of the standards that I was able to pull and connect to this, some of them come from the PA state standards, some of them Common Core. I'll pull from either one depending on what I need. And the first one, describing how citizens resolve conflicts in society and government. And that was, I believe, the one that I matched up with them creating their website in their campaign. And then the second one, drawing evidence from informational text, support analysis, reflection, and research. That was what I used for them to do their research and pull data, all of those things, and add it to their projects. And the last one, using technology, including the internet, to produce and publish writing. That was the one that I was able to use for them to be able to publish a website, right? So there's standards out there that can align with any social issue, anything you want to teach. It's I know it's not that easy for a lot of teachers who don't work in a project-based learning or work in an environment where they're creating their own curriculum. A lot of times the curriculum is given to them and they can supplement it how they will. So I did want to take some time and address that for, teachers so that they know, there's standards out there. You just got to tweak them and kind of make them fit to what you want to do, because that's pretty much what I do when I'm creating my curriculum. I'll have a thing that I know I want my students to do, and I pull up those standards and I'm looking through and I'm like, okay, this aligns with the writing piece I want them to do. And I'm just pulling it out so that just in case, you never know, the state might be like, this woman's teaching these kids about mass incarceration. That's not a part of our state standards. And it's like, well, these are the things I had them do that are a part of the state standards. So just, as a teachers, I feel like I'm always, in the back of my mind, just making sure that I'm doing my due diligence as the state has ordained me to do when it comes to these standards and things. And this was the actual outline of the project that they did. So this is what we call a project description, where this is what is used for the students to see what exactly I need them to do. So if you look right over in the box to the right, it says your project must include, and it tells them the things that they needed to have in their project. That as a professional, aesthetically pleasing. We went over all of those things meant. A historical overview of mass incarceration with data and the timeline of the history of mass incarceration. So we watched 13th. It was on them to then find other resources and articulate the history of mass incarceration on their website, because I feel genuinely about the when you're calling someone to action, you need to educate them first so they can know how deep an issue is. You could call someone to action all you want. You can ask them to make change. You can ask them to donate and do all of these things. But if they don't first are able to understand how deep an issue is, they're not as inclined. So that's what I told them. I said, you want them to know how deep this problem is. You want to pull on the emotion when you're writing this so that they can see how big of an issue it is and how it got to this. So you want to spell that out for them. Of course, I had them include an annotated bibliography. This is one of their first accounts with that, so their bibliographies. I did a lot of work with them on that. And then their call to action that propose concrete ways in which society and citizens can disrupt the system of mass incarceration. And I'll show some examples of a lot of those. And then on top of that, they also had a flyer. This was their presentation part, because they didn't stand up, present it in class. Their presentation was the flyer, and what they did was they printed out the flyers. They could hang them outside of the school, or they can post them up on their social media, have me post it on social media, all of those kind of things, just, you know, spreading the word about their website was their presentation grade, so that then people can then go see the work you did, look at your call to action, and hopefully, you know, then be called to action. I have some examples. I'm hoping I might have to come out to click on the links so I can show you all. Let me go to the chat or whatever I have. I can't see what you all can see right now.
We can
We
see
can see
it.
it though.
So this
Doing
is,
great.
and they worked as a team. So these were group projects. They were able to create. So again, this is the first part where they had to go through, write this history of mass incarceration. They did a timeline, right? And then some of them, they did quizzes for exceeded expectations, just to see like if people actually learned things from their website. They had to put in the data to support their stuff, and their call to action.
This is really awesome that you got middle school kids doing this, Aisha.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. So their call to action, I believe theirs was,
It looks like they're intervening on juries.
yeah. So they were doing things about that. So theirs was this. I know some of them, they actually wrote out some examples. Like they literally, some of them literally came up with templates that people could use to just copy the template and email your like send it to your governor, write a letter to your governor and things like that. And I think this was their campaign flyer. So they hung this up just to, you know, put it. I told them when they did the campaign flyers, put big numbers on it. You wanted to jump out at people, like you see this kind of number and you're like, oh, what is this? What's going on? You want to read more about it, and then it leads them to your whole website. I want to show
So
you
good. So
one or
good.
two more.
Aisha, did they use Canva to do all this?
So they use Google Sites. I introduced them to Canva. I love Canva, so I have them using Canva.
Oh, okay, that's what I
So
said.
their flyers, they were able to use Canva, but their websites, because the district has their websites are through Google, they have access to Google Sites. So anytime, like this is the first time we've created a website. We did a blog post website before. So we have access to Google Sites, which I think which is another easy way to access something like this is just by using my Google Sites, and they can create their own websites. So this one helps them incarceration now. They went through and they, you know, because it was a little tricky for me. I didn't want them to have to create like a place for people to donate. I said, well, why don't we, if you want to do a donation thing, you can link it to some sites that already are collecting donations, and you'll be like a funnel for them. Like people will look at your work and then go and see something else, and they can go and donate to these things. So they have the Innocence Project on here, the Fortune, the Sentencing Project. So they have a bunch of places where once you go to their website, you see this work these kids did. You know, you might be inclined. You're like, okay, I can go click donate and go donate to a site that helped educate them and things like that. I think that was what I wanted to show you on that one. And then this last one, I wanted to highlight their letters to the governor. So it literally
Oh,
says,
awesome.
copy the letter below, fill in your information and send it to your governor. If you don't know your governor, you can find it here. So they were really intentional, really, really put in a lot of work with these. I have my thoughts about the fonts and the color schemes, but you know,
That's a bold font choice for that one. But I love that.
I let them be creative that way. All I told them, I'm like, as long as it's aesthetically pleasing, but I'm like, this is really dark. It's hard for me to read. I told them that, but they're like, oh, we think it's fine. It's okay. So I do give them creative control usually when they're creating their projects. So in fact, I have to encourage them because sometimes others use the same font and leave it leave it the blue background that Sites gives you. So I'm like, no, let's make it creative. So once I tell them that, I can't then go and be like, well, don't do black. so I had to let them be creative once they did it. But I really was pleased with the way that they had the formats here to actually do it. And it was group projects, so it was like pretty much it was like 5 or 6 kids in the group, and they did really well on these. They did overall, they did really
They're
well.
really excellent, really nicely done. So
I
Yeah,
was like
really
really proud
congratulations.
of
professional.
them.
And they
Congratulations.
were they were so impressive at the
Mhm.
symposium.
Yeah.
Their knowledge when we were teaching them, we were just like, oh my God. Like it was they really absorbed the information through this unit.
They do good, and that's one of the things I can say on my end. I'm grateful for that. By the time I get them, usually they have already had 2 years of project-based learning, so they're already very open-minded to a lot of things. And also, these days, kids know. Like, I mean, kids have always known more than adults perceived, but these days, the extent of their knowledge, especially when it comes to things around social issues, the government, things like that, they know a lot about these things. It's just sometimes they gotta hone in on it and actually do some thorough research. So when
Right.
they get to do that, all it does is like feed more into this thing that they already knew a little bit about. I was excited to do mass incarceration because this was one thing that they didn't know a lot about already, which is it's kind of helps me
Wow.
to find some things like that these days. So I'm always striving like what new things can I bring to them and
Mhm.
expand their knowledge on, or even if it is something that I know they may be familiar with, how
Mhm.
can I push them even further? Like right now, because we're doing utopia and dystopia, and we're reading some fiction and reading the Hunger Games. And most of them have read the book, and I'm always like, you've read it, but you haven't read it in a classroom. You haven't read it with thought-provoking discussions. You haven't read it with assignments attached to it. So I'm constantly trying to push them to like be like engaged with it and actually like even if you've heard about something, that doesn't mean you know everything about it. And I use the example all the time. I'm like, I'm learning all the time. I learn new things every day. That's like I tell them all the time, like I just went to another PD the other day and I learned X, Y, and Z. So that they know that learning is a constant thing. I'm trying to push them with all of those things when it comes with learning.
Mhm.
Aisha, have you ever thought of using, which I know is old school, but having them read Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and contrasting that with the Hunger Games?
I haven't, but that might be a great a great thing that I've heard of that book, and I think I've read excerpts from it, but I never read the whole thing. But that would be a great thing because I was so upset. We chose Hunger Games. We were me and my grade partner, we were trying to decide between doing Hunger Games and doing The Giver. And she was
Oh, The
like,
Giver's powerful too.
it's and they none of them read it. So like that's it's like it's just an English. For me as an English teacher, I'm always like, I don't want to read a book that they've read because then I gotta keep hearing about it. They're middle schoolers too. They will keep saying, I already read this chapter. Can I do something every day? Same kid. I'm like, what did I say yesterday? No, you're gonna just have to read it again. It's okay. It's great to read a book more than once. It's great to read a book a million times. You'll learn something new every time. So I'm like, I was a little upset that we chose a book that they read already. But I definitely think that that would be the better way to go because then they can, that juxtaposition with both of their
Mhm.
be great. But just to wrap up with some key points, having a sound plan is always key. For me, we were really shaky. We knew getting permission to watch 13th what might be rocky, because it's not really rated for children viewers. It's more of a if you are a parent at home and you want to show your kids, of course you can show your kids. But to show it in a classroom, is probably controversial in many, many, many people's minds. But I went with it. I felt like it was great. We had trigger warnings every time. We made sure, like we prepped ourselves. I went through and rewatched it. Even though I had watched it right before, I still made sure that when before I showed a clip, I try to remember what was going to be happening in that clip so that I could give the proper trigger warnings and make sure that I'm letting them know because there is the scene. They show the scenes from there's scenes from a bunch of slave movies that can be
Yeah.
triggering and that show some rape scenes. There's some violent scenes and things like that. So you want to make sure that you plan that out and make sure that you're letting the kids know this is what's going to be happening. And also because I teach middle school, I have to give them a lot of talks around, hey, I know you might see this and your brain might tell you to laugh at it a little bit. We're not going to laugh at this. We are not going to let it out. Like things like that because it gets they get tricky. And a lot of the kids these days, what I'm learning is they are very desensitized to a lot of things. Like I've had experiences where kids like things that I would have like people would have said when I was in middle school, they would have gotten in a lot of trouble for, or just naturally wouldn't have said it. kids are very comfortable talking about certain things and saying things and making jokes about certain things these days because they are so desensitized to it. And I'm constantly fighting against that. So I knew that going into this, I structured it a certain way to make sure that I was going to be firm in explaining what we were going to tolerate and what we aren't going to tolerate. And I also always open the floor to letting them remind themselves and have the conversation amongst each other about what are the norms right now when we're watching something and we're talking about a serious issue, right? So going into something as serious as this or any serious thing, I always start there. And then just thinking about what I wanted my students to take away from this lesson, a unit like this, which for me was I wanted them to be able to take away knowing about this thing, and then also knowing that how rooted it is into a system, and also that there's activism going on around this and they can be a part of it. And then just consider having them create something that can be shared with the world as a way to bring activism into the classroom. It's something that I toyed with. I think this was the first time we actually created something that can be shared with the world. Like I could post this, I could share it with a lot of people. They can look at it and see what's going on. And for me, that was exciting and it was empowering to my students. So I wanted to say, like, if you were ever thinking about things like that, it's definitely something that made me like was one of my teacher win moments that I have them. They've created this thing that they can keep with them and they can share it with the world. And they've become, they've done a little piece of activism, even if they don't, continue to do activist work. They've done a little piece of activism that they can contribute to the world. And I believe that's it for me. Yep.
That's all.
Aisha, amazing.
Yeah, that's so
We're
good.
we're 1 minute over time, but Kim asked a bunch of great questions in the chat, and I just want to ask you one of them. So when they're building the websites, do they do interviews with any experts as part of their research to incorporate it into the website?
So they did it. Well, you guys were their expert.
Oh, that was what we did.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
that was what you guys did. So
Got
you
it.
guys, when you
That
guys
was
came,
the
that's why they had their papers with their questions, so that they could ask
Okay.
the questions.
That's why they kept coming back with the.
Mhm. And
Oh,
they were writing
all
the
right.
stuff down. You guys were the opportunity. to
Great.
Okay.
That was another thing I did want to incorporate. That's why I said it was important for me to be able to use you guys as the resource to come in and have them talk to people. Otherwise, we are research because we're project based. We're also research heavy based. So every project usually includes some research. So I did just have them do a lot of research as well, and then we got to do that. But I do think having you guys come in was another big benefit as well, and I think it was something that they helped them be successful on that project.
Wow.
This is awesome.
Amazing.
Really, really awesome.
Amazing.
Awesome,
So, we did record this. It will go out to all the people
Okay.
that were signed up.
And
So they'll still get to see it.
Lauren, one
Yeah.
request.
Go ahead,
Kim had some great questions in the chat. Can you
Yeah.
answer them and share those questions with us as well
In the,
in the chat box? Kim
Yeah,
had
I was
those
writing them down.
questions.
yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to write them down, but they were coming so rapidly. But if you could capture them and share them with us, that would be awesome.
No
Sorry, it's my
problem.
brain working. And
No,
Aisha,
great.
with
No,
what
it's
you're
super good.
doing, the National Constitution Center has a whole program where they train teachers on how to teach their students to have civil dialogues or constitutional conversations. And with what you were doing, it's something that's an awesome activity at the beginning of the year, and the kids then create their class norms, what they do. It would be awesome for you to integrate into what you're doing. So Carrie has my email. If you want, I can just give you my email if you want to email me, and I'll share here, I'll put it in the chat. And I'll share resources, and then I can refer you to some of the people like Sarah and Kevin at the National Constitution Center with their training. Because it would be perfect to set up what you're doing in the classroom with your students.
Can I get this training? Am I allowed to have this training?
Yeah. Keith, if you want, you tell me, and I will hook you up with Ryan, I will hook you up with Sarah and Kevin. I learned it from them, I guess, like 3 years ago, and I started implementing it into my AP classes. And the discussion that kids have, they always have to come back to the Constitution. It can't be a political question, and they always have to come back to research, and they like create norms for when their groups, how everyone has to speak once before someone can speak twice, and they pull some of their norms from what the Supreme Court justices do, and an interview with Justice Breyer. And PBS and the Bill of Rights Institute have also done some really great work about constitutional conversations and civil dialogue. So I've actually been doing a lot of work with it. So if you want to email me, I'll share the resources that I have, and I can give you Sarah and Kevin's emails at the National Constitution Center, because they actually do scholar exchanges on that too, to train with your students.
Yes, that would be great. And I
So-
also saw in the chat about using the current events to relate. I didn't do that, but that'll be a great thing, and I'm definitely going to do that next time, because I definitely they were already able to make a lot of connections to things that are going on today, but it would be so great for them to be able to do it and actually do a current event in real time to connect it. So thank you for
You're
that.
welcome. And it's really easy to do if they have iPhones, because they can customize their Apple News to follow the topics and the search for
alright.
current events.
Oh,
Which I have my students do for all of the research project topics. So the Apple News is constantly researching for them, so they can go back and get current events to update the research for their projects. And so most of the, we have iPads at my school, but most of the kids have iPhones. So it's really easy to use the technology they have then to find current events for your projects.
wow. Okay, I took screenshots of all the questions. So we're
Yeah.
set.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you
This was
so
All right.
much, everybody.
awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.
It was so
Thank you,
great
Bye.
chatting with everybody.
Bye,
Bye.
Aisha.
Hold on, I'm
Nice
trying to
meeting
get
you.
let me get Kim's email.
Did you get it?
Do you get my
Trying to write
email?
it down.
It's
Right.
K Barben, BARBEN at G for great, V for valley, S for school, D for district.org.
All right, I got you. Thank you so
And
much.
you're welcome. And then I'll share any resources that I have. So
That's it.
Keith,
thank
you.
you so
send
much.
you an email tomorrow, Keith.
See ya.
Okay, and I got an email coming to you this evening, so.
Okay. And Keith, if you
Bye.
send,
Thank you, guys.
you can email
All
me
right.
too, and I'll send it to you too.
Okay, awesome.
Bye.
You too, guys.
All
Have a
right,
good
thanks.
evening.